Welcome to the Catbird Quilts. I'm Kathy Martin, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about sewing curved seams. And there's a lot to it, but it's not as hard as you think. So stay with me. So this orange peel, actually 4 orange peels sewn together, is the reason that I have anything at all to say about curved seams, and I have a lot to say about curved seams. I was intimidated to do curved seams. I think a lot of people are, but if I can do it, you can do it. And so I want to show you some of the things that I've learned, tips and tricks and shortcuts and all kinds of things to help you either learn how to sew curved seams for the first time, or maybe if you've had some struggles, the things that I've learned will be helpful to you. I'm going to be doing cutting templates, not cutting with a ruler, because my particular pattern that I started with used a template. So admittedly, using a specialty curved ruler with a rotary cutter is going to be far more accurate than using a template. And a lot of people don't like to use templates, but you will eventually find yourself with a quilt pattern that uses a template, whether it's for curved seams or not. And I have learned through my own mistakes some things that I want to show you. So this is the template from the Copaway pattern, Copaway quilt by Cotton and Joy. My first tip for you is use cardstock when you're printing your template. So it's a little bit thicker and it will hold up a little bit better, especially if you use the tracing method, which is what I do. So you want to print out your template on cardstock if you can, as thick as you have. And then you want to make sure that your test square is 1 inch. And that's why it says 1 inch test square. And then you'll be ready to go. Tip number 2, when you cut your templates, if you read the instructions, it will say cut on the line. But it's been my experience that it's hard to really keep an accurate cut with scissors on the line. So you can cut on the inside of the line or on the outside of the line. But whatever you do, do that consistently across all of your templates and all of your piecing. So let me show you. This is this exact template in cardstock, and I have cut it inside the line. I mean, just barely. And what that does, if I cut on the inside of the line, is I can use my scissors and follow that dotted line. Some patterns will not have them as a dash line. It'll be a solid, bold, black line. And you use the line, you just put your scissors right on that edge. Likewise, if you decide you want to go to the outside, this one I cut on the outside of the dash line. Here's the one cut to the outside. Here's the one cut to the inside. That is actually not an insubstantial amount of difference. So you can see where if I cut my template for half of my pieces on the inside and half of my pieces on the outside, same with this outer piece, by the time they all get sewn together, there is going to be a difference in your end block. You may think, oh, it's just a tiny little bit. That tiny little bit is a 1/16 of an inch. So if you do that twice, that's an 1/8 of an inch. If you have 4 seams across whatever span, you're now at a 1/4 of an inch. Whatever you do, do that consistently across all of your pieces. How do I know this? Because I didn't do it consistently. And my first trip around this template, I cut it straight on the line. And let me show you what that looks like. Now you can see where I have used this to trace, so it is all marked up. But if you will notice, all along the edge, you can see where I cut on the line. It's got that dashed line. And then we get right over here to this part, and I didn't quite nail it. And so you can see all the dashes here, and then the dashes go away. Where the dashes went away is a variance in that piece size compared to the template. And this is why templates are a little challenging. So because I made my first 6 or 7 blocks that way, I really don't have the luxury to go to an inside or an outside now. But as you are approaching your templates, that's why I suggest that you cut inside the line or outside the line, but not through the line, because it is very, very hard to get that just to nail it. This is the one that I'm going to be using when I show you how to mark your pieces. Let's talk about tracing your pieces. Now, you can use your piece and lay it down on your fabric and pin it, and then use your scissors, your fabric scissors this time, to cut around your template. I don't advise doing that because as you cut your fabric, 2 things can happen. Well, actually, lots of things can happen. Sometimes, even with pins, your fabric will shift and you'll have variance in your piece sizes. If I was going to do it this way, I would do a bunch of pins. As you're cutting along your template, the template can shift, your fabric can pull or shift, and you can also accidentally nick your template with your scissors. And it might just be a little bit, but every little bit that you shave off is going to change the size of your template. So what I do is I trace. One of the things that I've learned in tracing is you want to have a very sharp marking tool. I use a graphite pencil. I really like them. I can't even tell you why. You can use a regular old pencil. This is actually solid graphite, and you want to try to get it as sharp as possible. The sharper your point, the more accurate your tracing is going to be. And then the more accurate your end pieces are going to be. Ideally, you would want to put your template piece with the grain on your fabric. And so the grain is, there are the fibers that go this way and the fibers that go this way. And that is considered the grain. I call it the XY axis because I'm a math nerd. We're going to call this the crust of the orange peel that I'm making. So this is the crust and this is the pie. So pie and crust. I will sometimes call this a leaf, and sometimes I call this a petal, and sometimes I call it the peel, but I almost always call this the crust. So in this case, we're going to put our crust down, and because it is at a right angle, I'm looking at the grain of the fabric, and I'm just lining that up. Now, I'm using linen because I'm crazy, and I love linen. It has a very open weave very often, and you can see the grain very clearly. Do not get too hung up on the grain. And the reason I say that, because I use shirts and thrifted items, a lot of the times I'm not using yardage. I don't have a ton of fabric. So I have to get creative in how I get my pieces on my pieces. And so what I have found so far with success, so this is not a learn from what I have messed up, it's a learn from what I have had success with. It really doesn't matter. In the end, there may be some variance in your sewing, very small, but once you get it pieced together and then quilted and then washed, it literally will come out on the wash. If that's more than you want to worry about, don't worry about it. But if you happen to be, like I have in this situation, have a very clear grain and you do have a straight line, it just makes sense to put it on the grain line. So what I'm going to do is hold my piece down, and I don't pin it because sometimes I feel like it buckles a little bit, especially if I'm working on a hard surface. And I'm taking my sharp graphite pencil and I'm just going to trace along. Now you can see on my template where my pencil has jumped the template. It's so ugly. It's so messy and ugly. It does happen. And it's obviously no big deal. I literally just did it. You won't be able to see it because it's behind my hand because I need that left hand to hold it still. This is the beauty of using cardstock because it is thick enough and it doesn't slide a lot. But sometimes my pencil will just bloop, jump the edge, jump the curb, like me in parallel parking, and mark up on my template. You think I'm joking, but that's a true story. I just am going to mark my whole piece, and I'm trying to make sure I get nice clear lines. And there's my piece. Here is the exact same piece where I have done, and I nested one template inside the other like this. This is a very useful skill if you, like me, use shirts or thrifted items because you don't have the excess. So these are pockets from men's pants. And now I can get 2 of these crust pieces from these 2 pockets, well, 2 per pocket. Let me show you on a darker piece of fabric. Here's a darker piece of fabric. I also have a chalk pencil, and it is very, very useful when you have darker fabric. So that graphite pencil works great and does wash out, but having a light chalk pencil is also really helpful. You can tell I have that as a pretty sharp point on there. I'm just holding my template really still. So, and I'm going to do my little spider hand here. Spider-Man hand, Spider-Man. So you can see that now if I was doing a darker fabric. And the tip about then going on to cutting what you've traced, you want to be sure and cut right on this line, but to the inside. Because if you think about the size of your piece, you can just imagine if I cut to the outside of this white line, I'm adding to the size of my piece. Where my piece is just to the inside of that white line. When you get your scissors and you get ready to cut, I'm going to show you. So where I'm going to cut is just to the inside of that white line. And I'll know I've got it when the white line is on the outside and there's none of that white line on the inside. That's going to be the same way with the graphite pencil. You know, maybe it's easier for you to cut just to the inside with it this way, or it might be easier for you to cut just to the inside the other way. Whatever is easier for you, what's left on the outside is that white line. So we just want to make sure that what's left of your piece is only piece and no trace lines. Once we get our pieces traced all out, let me show you what that looks like on a shirt front. So here are 2 examples of here I've cut the crust, or I've traced the crust onto my orange linen, really kind of every which way to try to make this fabric go further. I did manage to keep it on the grain line, but if I hadn't, really, I wouldn't have worried about it. This is a shirt front. Do you see that? And so I just tried to get as many pieces as possible on that shirt front. So that meant I lined them up this way and then did one because I couldn't quite get it on the diagonal. These will sew slightly differently because they're not on the same orientation. But again, in the end, once it's pieced and ironed and quilted and washed, you won't know. Just try to get the most out of the fabric so you have as little waste as possible. If you have the fabric to spare, in my experience, it is helpful to line your peels up either horizontally on the grain line or vertically on the grain line. And then that way the grain runs through the corners. If you don't worry about it. But if you have the extra fabric and can do them that way, it does help a little bit when you get ready to sew. So we have our crust and we have our peel, and now we have to figure out how to get them ready to sew. And it's so easy. Y'all, it's so easy. You take your peel and you fold it in half with the points together, just like that, and you crease right down the middle. You don't have to press it this way. You can just do it with your fingertips. Next, we do the exact same thing with our crust piece. So I'm folding that in half. I'm going to try to get that right on the point if I can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but definitely getting in the middle is going to be help you. Now we're ready to prep our fabric for sewing. You start with your peel down and you put your crust like an L right where the corners meet each other. And that feels like that can't be right. That's not the way you're going to sew these together. It seems like it should be like this. But if I sewed that together and then folded it back, it wouldn't work, right? So you make an L, and we want to put one pin right here in this corner. That's going to hold that together. Now, I use the 3-pin method. Some of you have learned how to do curves and you don't pin at all. And to you, I say, that is so wonderful. My hat is off to you. I need the security of the pins. So that's the reason I'm teaching it this way. What I did just then while I was talking was I lined up my 2 folds. So this is the center of my crust. This is the center of my peel. You can see that little lump where the 2 creases are. And I put a pin right in the center. And then now I'm going to bend this back around and line that up and put a little pin in that. And this is the 3-pin method. So now I have my little peel and my crust ready to go. And we're going to go to the sewing machine and I'm going to show you how to sew it. Now we're at the sewing part, which is the fun part and not nearly as hard as you think it is. And the trick is to really just not overthink it, which of course I do. I have my peel with my crust pinned down to it. And what I did is I lifted up my foot and slid that right down. I have my pinned pieces together right up against my needle. You can start with a little leader or an ender or whatever. You can do that. You don't have to do that. I just am going to start right at the edge. And I have my edge of my fabric right along the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. When I first slide this under the needle or under the foot, it's like this. And so I don't know where everything is lined up together. So once I get it under the foot, I lift up my top crust and I'm just using my finger to just gently get that right on the edge of where the white is. You can just see one little thread there, one little fiber. And I'm just making sure that my orange linen in this case is just lined right up with that white. And again, does not have to be perfect, but if you can get it lined up pretty close, that's going to help you in your end result. All I'm doing is holding this together with my fingers, just very lightly. There are little puckers here. Do not stress about that. And it's because we're going one curve from one direction to this curve in the other direction. And it's just going to buckle like that. That is normal and fine. You're just going to cup your fingers around that. Don't try to pinch it down or lay it down because you might end up getting a little pleat. And I'll show you what to do if that happens. So I'm just using my left hand to kind of gently hold that in place. And if you can imagine that this piece, this little pin, that's 3 o'clock. And then where my hand is noon. And I am just going to let my hand gently take the fabric from 3 o'clock to 12 o'clock through the needle. That's all I'm doing. I'm going to take my pin out right as I go. And what I'm keep doing is just keeping the edge of my fabric right on the edge of my 1/4 inch foot. Sometimes I'll let my right hand help my left hand. But basically, I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling. I'm just slowly letting that tip around. If you have a doubt, you just stop. Recenter. I'm just making sure that once it gets to that pin, it's staying straight. Do you see how my pin started down here at 3 and it's just working itself around on that center axis? Now I'm almost to the place where I'm going to hit my pin. So I'm going to stop, take my pin out. The needle is down, holding my fabric in my my two fabrics together and keeping it in line. And now I'm doing the exact same thing I did before. I'm going to use my right hand to kind of nudge that fabric right along the edge. I'm going to hold that down with my left hand. And now I'm just going to do it again. Just letting those feed dogs just pull it along. Now, sometimes as you're going, like right there, it's starting to crawl just a little bit. I'm going to just slide it a little closer. There is a bubble in that fabric. I'm not worried about it. It's going to straighten itself out. Now you'll see right here, if you're very observant, that white is ending right here, and this little orange linen piece is kind of not lined up anymore. That is okay. We're going to trim this in the end. And now it's just going around, and I'm imagining where that white is underneath and just finishing that up. Now I'm going to let mine run a little past. And this is what we have. I'm going to put it right here so you can see it. Do you see that? We have just sewn our curve. Is it perfect? Probably not. Is that all right? 100% yes. A little bit of my white is peeking around the edge. I stopped and made a course adjustment, and you can see where there's a little doop right there. Totally fine. Not to worry. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to press this, because then I have to put the other crust on it. And now it's time to press. We have our peel attached to our crust. And what we're going to do is press our seams open. Now, I learned this technique from Tiny Orchard Quilts. She is wonderful and has an outstanding video on this. So the first thing we're going to do is press to the crust side. So I'm using my nail to kind of scrape across that seam, try not to stretch it too much. And we're going to press toward the crust. So that's our first step. And I have my iron on the hottest setting, and I'm should be using no steam, but my iron has decided it wants to steam everything. So you will see steam, but it should not be steaming right now. Case in point.
You just fogged the lens.
Did I?
It's okay.
Okay. So I have my seam pressed to the crust, and I'm going to use my clapper, my tailor's clapper. Thank you, Caitlin. And let that absorb the moisture and heat and really get it nice and flat. Sometimes I'll leave my clapper there and press another one and come back to it. And now I'm going to open this up and separate my seam. So what this does, it gets the flattest seam and all the fabric to the crust side. And now we're going to put all of the peel fabric to the peel side. And there are a lot of benefits for doing this, but not the least of which is the colored fabric goes back to its own side. So you don't have to worry about it peeking through on the other side of your piecing. So again, I'm using my nail to just scrape right along that seam so it's nice and flat. And then here we go again with the steaming. That should not be steaming. And I have discovered that starting from that curve and then just kind of working a little bit that way seems to work really, really well. So there we have it. Gonna let that sit, absorb the moisture and heat. Then it will be ready for the next crust piece to be sewn on. One of the things that's easy to forget is that you need to press your seams open before you do the next crust piece. Sometimes I have gotten in a hurry and gone on and zipped through that next part, and then I realized that my seams are bulky where I have not pressed them open. So I have pressed my seams open on my first peel and crust, and now we're going to add the other crust. And in this case, it really looks like crust. It's like a peach pie. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. So I have creased my crust. I have creased my peel. pinned in the middle where the crease is and on the two ends, and I'm ready to do it again. And it's the same process. So it's not hard. I mean, it's really like you may have nervousness, but the actual process is just so much easier than you think it's going to be. And here we go again. Now you may notice when you do the second half of your curve that it feels like it pulls a little bit more. I don't know if you saw that it kind of looked taut like that. That is normal for the back half of it because now it's got that tension of the first half of the curve is holding it down. I'm sure you've probably had the experience where if you just get going, sometimes just keeping going is better than the little stop and start. And now I'm going to pull this pin out and finish that up. Now let's look and see how we did. Much nicer. Look at that. You can tell that I just kind of kept a continual motion. You will occasionally see right there, my peel is peeking out a little bit underneath. It's really no big deal. That will be a negligible difference. So it's looking pretty good to me. Now we're going to press that the proper way, which is seams open. And then I'll show you how to do those two pieces together, and then we'll be done. Second crust piece done. This is what it looks like. So lovely. Let me move my mat just for a second and show you. If your piece looks like this and it's kind of looks a little warped along the edges, fear not. That's the way they look. All of mine look that way. They never look square. We're going to trim them up in the end and it's going to be fantastic. So proceed without worry. So we're going to press it to the crust side, just as we did before. And then we're going to open this up, peel our little peel back, get that going. Again, finger pressing. When I first started quilting, I thought finger pressing was really dumb. And I was very resistant. I don't know why I'm always resistant to really great ideas. I don't know. Says a lot about me, I bet. So we're gonna finger press that, scratch, 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 scrape, 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 get it going in the right direction. Great thing about working with linen is it does press up so nicely. So even though it stretches and it feels like it's going to be challenging to work with, and it can be, this part is really wonderful. All right, so I'm going to do exactly what I did when it was just the one crust piece. And I'm scooting it along. I'm lifting up my iron ever so slightly just to make sure. And then I'm going to use my wonderful clapper again. I'm not pressing, I'm just resting my hands. And now we're ready for trimming so that we can put our pieces together. So I have my little orange peel units. These will eventually get sewn to each other this way, but we have to trim them first. Now, not every pattern calls for trimming your orange peel units. This one does, and boy, am I thankful. Because it does square it up nicely and it means all of your seams are going to be nice and tight and fit perfectly together. There are patterns that do not call for trimming. Trust the process and just proceed as you would. Those little curved pieces will get wrapped up in the seam allowance and you don't have to worry about it. But it is really nice to have this particular pattern because it does allow me to trim it down to where it's a nice, beautiful square. So what I do when I do my trimming, this is one of the few times that I'm going to advocate for a specialty ruler. Mine goes up to 5.5. Sorry, not 4.5. 5.5. This is a Creative Grids ruler. We're going to use the 5 mark on this. I use that 45-degree line to bisect that peel portion. And what that does is that means that when it's square, the peel will also be on the correct angle because I've gone from this corner to this corner. Now, sometimes they fit exactly right and nicely. You can see this little corner capping that white. This same little corner, that arrow right there, is not quite. So sometimes I'll just shimmy it each way just a little bit so that it's centered up in that peel, because the peel is not going to be affected by the trimming. Honestly, this is the hardest part to me of making orange peel units. You would think it would be the seaming, you would think it would be the sewing, but for me, it's the trimming, because if you trim it perfectly, no such thing as perfect. If you trim it well, your blocks will come together very, very nicely. So you want to take a little time and care and make sure you line it up. So I'm just trying to get that 45-degree angle right in the middle of my peel and kind of centered, where if there's a little bit of white on that side, there's a little bit of white on this side. You can see my 1/4-inch seam allowance right there and right there. So that's going to give me what I need. No matter how you trim your orange peel units, you want to have a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around the whole thing. Otherwise, your peel will get caught up in your seam allowance. We don't want that. So I've got those two corners. Now we're going to do the exact same thing, rotate it around, literal exact same thing. I'm just going to line that, try to center that 45-degree angle and my little corners. This is one of the few times that I feel like I use my ruler well. A lot of times I use my mat. This time I'm not looking at my mat at all. I'm only using my ruler. And now I'm going to trim this side. So there we have it. There's our trim. Now remember that wonky curve place? See how that got cut off in the trimming? Really until you're done with the whole thing. Try not to panic. And this is a nice 5-inch square, which is what the pattern calls for. You can see it just right there on the line. And then when I go to put these together with other pieces just like this, that seam allowance should make it where the peels line up right together, just right together in that seam on every side. So now I have my pieces trimmed, and we're going to take these two pieces and go back to the sewing machine and sew them together. First thing that I'm going to do is make sure they're lined up, and I'm going to pin them. Right here, I'm going to get these lined up. Now, what I'm doing is I'm lining those seams up together. Do you see that right there? Let me point to it. It just happens that my two pieces are different colors, and that helps nicely. So I'm getting my seams lined up, not my edges, because what I want is for my two peels to come together nicely. And I have a better shot of doing that with my seams lining up than with my edges lined up. So I'm going to put that first pin in to stabilize that. I'm going to kind of feel along the way. What I'm doing is really kind of trying to make sure that those peels line up nicely so that they are nice and symmetrical. And then I'm going to go to the other end and do the same. So do you see that again? Right there where my coral peachy orange is coming together and my beige is coming together. I'm going to put a pin there as well. Now, I'm not sewing right there, but what that's going to do is stabilize my peel right across that, corner. And now I can put a pin in my other end. And that's what I'm going to sew. And you can always just check by opening it up. See how that's going to come together right there on that line. That's going to be just where it needs to be. So I'm going to make sure my seams are nice and flat down. Get that right under my 1/4-inch presser foot. And I want it just right on the edge to get that scant 1/4-inch seam allowance. Let me scooch it just a smidge. And here we go. I'm using a scant 1/4-inch seam allowance here because I have read and have had so many experiences with patterns that you really need to do that stamp. Here's the reveal. Let's open it up. Oop, I forgot my pen was there. Let's see how it did. Oh, look at that. So exciting. It's always exciting. So you can see when I open this seam, I'm going to open that seam up and press that open. Let's do that with a little finger press real quick. That is what my peel is going to look like. Came together really nicely. Can you see that right there? Look at that. Yes. So great. So I'm going to open it up over here off to the side. Good old finger press with the scrape right along that seam. Look how pretty. Oh, look how pretty that is. And that's what your curves are going to look like too. Trust the process. Don't overthink it. Do the steps. Hold your nice tight 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then now I'm going to do 2 more of these and I'm going to have a whole block and it's going to be great. Just like your curve seams are going to be great too. Thanks for being with me today. I hope this has been really helpful for you. If you have been intimidated about curved seams, take the plunge. Not half as hard as you think it's going to be, and you'll have beautiful results in your quilts. I'm Kathy Martin. This is the Catbird Quilts. Thank you so much for watching.